Anyway, if you haven't noticed, most of us get along, so that helps too. Nikki, are you ready to kick us off with Storybook Land?
Oh, geez, I'm first. I guess
Well, my printer is running right next to the microphone. I don't want it to get picked up.
All right, I guess I can do that. Just give me a second to share my screen. And yes, we want that one. So I actually have the stories live now, or at least the ones I started at. Our version of Storybook was really old and outdated, and I was in Webpack hell for about 3 or so days trying to get all of this stuff put together. But then I finally decided just to use the OpenWC stuff, and it worked magically at a moment where I guess it was really late at night that that I basically complained to Brian and said, look, I've been doing this 3 days and I don't know how to, I don't think I'm going to get this stuff to work, and I'm just going to move on to something else. And then about the time he's like, yeah, this stuff is really hard, I'm like, actually, unintentional April Fools, the OpenWC stuff worked really well for this. So so I do have it working, which is, you know, kind of nice, because, you know, I'd like to be like everybody else who gets stuff working. I've got all the knobs in here to make the adjustments. So you can see oh, this is also really fun. I have it right now randomly putting in community quotes because I thought Katrina would be amused.
I am, thank you.
You're welcome. But yeah, you can kind of adjust everything with all the knobs, but I didn't want to have to hard code all of those knobs in. So yeah, the getting Storybook to work was a hard part. And so that was probably the hardest part of the battle. But then once I got it working, and here you can see our pickers and all of that. But once I was able to get it working, I'm like, we have, I don't know, how many elements do we have at this point, Brian?
So I just did a I did a learn a publish right before the meeting, and it said 172 repos went out to NPM, but I estimate we have around 400 elements.
Yeah. So
how many of those are reusable? Probably like 150.
So I don't want to have to do a couple hundred of these things over and over again from scratch, looking at all of their properties. And so what I decided was that I wanted to do it the lazy way. So if I go into Simple Picker, I'll use that one. Well, actually, let's do accent card because it's the easiest. What I wanted to do was, instead of having to map all those properties to knobs, I just wanted it to find the properties. And so, so I basically created this thing called Storybook Utilities. I used it before in our old version of Storybook, but the amount of code I still needed to create the stories was a pain. So I cleaned it up with the new version. And if I pull up Storybook Utilities, it's doing all the heavy lifting of opening or importing all the knob types. It pulls in that simple colors color library I've demoed in the past. I'm working on getting it to do some lorem ipsum. It will get all the colors from simple colors to make them options within those knobs. So if I go back to my accent card, all of these colors are pre-populated for me in any element that happens to have a property that's mapped to simple colors. Then it's actually going through, and I have it getting the HAX properties. All of our elements that get used in HAX, and let me pull up accent card. They all have a section called HAX properties. So you can see this is what actually connects it with HAX, so that HAX knows which fields you fill in to update the components that you're creating within it. My cat agrees. So you can see there are settings. There are, each setting has a property, which is the property that's set on the element, the title that the user sees in the field. You get an input method, and that input method is really defining what the field type is. Notice that we have some custom ones that I had to change the mapping to. And we also then have icons that get used in the HAX interface, options for selects. So basically all of the data I would need to map things to knobs, all of that is actually right here. And so in my code for storybook utilities, I'm just going through looking for HAX properties. If I have HAX properties, I use those, loop through them, and there's a point where I decide what type of knob and what the values are. If those properties aren't available, then I just look at the card's properties themselves that are defined in the component, which give me a little less to work on as far as, you know, what type of field to use and what type of default values, but it's still better than working with nothing. So then when I go down to my knob settings, oh, here's where I've been setting random shit. So if I didn't want to have an empty value in some of my components, I can set some random stuff. I built myself a few random things, like if I give you a list of options, just pick one randomly. If I want a random number between X and Y, here's this random. All of this I was just building out today. This is my random community text that will be replaced by lorem ipsum. This is where the magic of setting the knobs happens, by looking at my different HAX items and turning them into knobs. And then I make the element by iterating through those knobs and setting those properties. And I send the element back to the story. I also have the option to add some custom default values. So if I don't want to just trust it to something random and get some kind of a random image, I can set what my, you know, in this one, you know, I want an animated and a non-animated. So I didn't want to just trust this to some random image generator to pull that off. So I set those values, and you can see in Simple Picker, one of the things I haven't gotten ready and working yet is the knobs for arrays. I mean, if this were just, you know, a set of strings, it would be different, but it's choking for me. So right now I'm just setting the options in here instead of allowing those to be, you know, to be an option that can be set in the knobs. But it's kind of nice to be able to set these up, to be able to override some of the things, or just let it go and have it set some defaults. I think that pretty much covers what I've been doing with it so far. Any particular questions about it?
So the random content that you're assigning, I've been wondering, like, when we have, so when you're using HAX and you select a type that you're going to put in the page, I wonder if there's some happy middle ground between us taking some of that fodder content that you're injecting and actually having some way of telling HAX that, like, hey, I'm not just, because, so for example, if you drop a, like an accent card, if you drop it into HAX right now, it basically doesn't fill the space until you start filling out the fields and doing something useful with it.
Oh, so if we actually add some HAX fields to define what we want the default to be, and some of those could actually be calling upon a random.
It could be, yeah. I'm wondering if maybe there's some happy middle ground there where we actually just make HAX able to, like,
God, I love that.
If they define something like that, ship with, you know, some fodder content. The issue was, like, I sort of did that for a little bit with images, so that, because if you drop in an image, you got to have something there or else nothing.
Yeah. Well, we could have a set of, like, generic placeholder images that then get placed that way.
Yeah, that would be cool.
I like this.
Images, especially, like, really anything that has layout implication is where it becomes problematic. I mean, if it's, you know, that bitter much title thing, like, that's nice to have it there, because then it's like, well, I can see visually where the placeholder is going to be for that piece. But
well, and not all slots are slots that are necessary, so it's nice to be able to define that into, you know, define that in the HAX properties. Then you kind of have a sense, because I use the HAX properties to think about, well, how's the end user who's not, you know, using it as a tag going to interact with it? And to me, that maps really well toward knobs. And so maybe, you know, like I don't necessarily need a footer or a subheader in here. I mean, I can add one, but I can see what the card does without it.
True. I also wonder if, is there a place in the knob for a descriptive text since we have descriptions that float with it? Or, I mean, I haven't seen them, so.
There is not. So the best I could do, I did the, you know, I have the human readable title and the property name next to it when I ran this. But yeah, I have it doing all kinds of fun randoms, like, where's the random color? Oh yeah. So we have the random colors that come from simple colors, but then for anything that needs just a hex code, I have it now generating random hex codes as well.
Nice.
Yeah.
There's also, you mentioned in the schema part where you try and just make up what the values are. There's primitive fallback support in HAX that if an element is dumped into the DOM that doesn't have HAX properties, it'll try and do something similar and just make them up. So I wonder if you couldn't either combine that code or enhance the way HAX is doing it, or just read right off of it. There's also,
or, do we drop some of this into simple fields?
yeah, or something like that too.
Because maybe simple fields need some of this too.
Yeah, almost like a like guess what the thing is. Right? Because some of it is, you're right, it's like, well, this is a string, I guess I'll just give you a text input. Others, like the way that HAX does the search inputs and maps that to real data, you can do some intelligent guesses at times. So like if something is source or href, you can basically fake that into being a URL field as opposed to a normal field. Another one that I'll do is, oh shoot, what is it? Like alt. Like I have a special field for alt that, you know,
Which is just a required text field.
Yeah, right. So like simple stuff like that we can have at least some primitive mapping. When something isn't loaded though, I do at least trigger a warning in the console that's like, hey, you would get better support if you actually did da da da. But
yeah. So yeah, so this is like just barely up and running, and I have not put all however many elements we have in here yet, because I haven't really gotten to play with all of the data types and figure out, but this really gives me something to go on to think about how this might work in HAX schema and how we want it to work in HAX schema.
And if there's any ability to overlap it with a custom element
yes.
.json file, which was a provocative idea. Who's that? I think Benny brought that up on Twitter.
Yeah, and we could definitely have something where we set precedents, like try this, if we don't have this, try that, and if we don't have that, try this. So we could go from HAX to the custom elements JSON, and then at the very least properties with some of the, you know, guesswork that you're doing.
It's awesome, Nikki. I know it's only half done, but
it doesn't feel awesome yet.
Well, the hard part is
just
done.
Getting it going was a lot of work, and I'm like, everybody else gets this shit to work. Why is it that it's so hard for us?
I get a little annoyed. I mean, before you went and tackled that, I was getting really annoyed with just the general sentiment was like, well, yeah, if you did a project that automatically worked with Webpack, this wouldn't be a problem. It's like,
yeah, searching for this shit was really difficult, because it's like, okay, but this is for other people's use cases. I'm looking for this specific piece of help on my specific use case, which is kind of different. So yeah, I got really frustrated, and there was a point where, yeah, I was gonna walk away from it. And that's the point that I unintentionally April Fooled you.
How much of our existing story files is usable, or are you basically just burning that configuration down? Yeah, okay.
Yeah, actually that's good, because it was, this will give me a better chance to build something, you know, that works better than what we had before.
I have a quick question, if you don't mind, Nikki.
Sure.
About your story, since you were just mentioning that you got Storybook up and running, is the Storybook that you're using, is it like the web component version, or is it
Yes.
like one of the, okay. And
Yes, I use the OpenWC web component version,
okay.
and it was like night and day. It was me and Storybook hell for days and days and days. And believe me, I picked this up like a year ago and also was frustrated. I had it working, and then we updated some stuff, and I blamed Brian for killing it last year. And then I tried to fix it. I'm like, well, I don't have time for this. I need to build stuff. So I walked away from it, tried it again. It was still a pain. And then I did the OpenWC stuff, which was specifically built around our use case of web components. So I didn't run into all of those little weird problems where everything was built around React and Vue and all the other stuff.
Yeah, that's what I was, because we're starting to begin to, well, at least we've made the decision to go ahead and set up a Storybook for web components.
Mm-hmm.
And in our initial looking, or in my initial investigation, I was like, oh boy, they've got all these, but they don't have the web component one. And I've been looking around, and I've not I've not gotten as far as you have, but
and this doesn't even feel like far.
Hearing your story, I wanted to ask.
Well, and I am telling you that it's a struggle, because I definitely, the impression I get once that it's up is like, well, why the expletive deleted? Can't I figure this out? Everybody else has, and it's actually kind of hard. But the OpenWC stuff made a heck of a lot of difference.
Could you post a link to that, just so
I absolutely can do that. Let me.
Thanks.
Yeah, I threw a couple links to the package
you have it.
JSON. Yeah, that Nikki's referencing.
Great.
Specifically on this one, Earl. Like this is where I was getting so like rant laden forceful at Open Apereo about the need for us to collaborate on our mono repo structures.
Right.
Because like these lessons in these little things are just, I mean, Nikki would have no idea if me and Mike Potter's on here didn't fight with the tooling a year earlier, and we had no idea how to build this stuff without looking at what Red Hat was doing with Patternfly at the time. So these and then you end up feeling silly, because in the end it's like, well, we have like basically the same configuration. I just literally didn't know what to use. So Nikki, speaking of which, once you get this working with ours, that would be a really good piece to backport into the the WC factory tooling.
Oh, that's on my list. Once I
Okay,
get it the
good.
way I want it, I need to look at that. I also kind of want to centralize. I saw that the Patternfly folks are now doing a gulp file factory, so that we don't have a million different variations of gulp files floating around. So
that would be nice too.
That's on my Nikki to-do list too. I like to clean virtual house, just not real house. But I'm gonna post some links to the repo so that you can also see how everything's configured.